This video is going to show you how you can compute total scores on questionnaires, or subscales on questionnaires, or reverse items on questionnaires, and so on in SPSS using some simple syntax commands. So this is basically going to save you from having to add things up yourself, in which it's very easy to make mistakes when adding up and also very time consuming. So I'm going to show you a few basic programs that are going to get around this and make your scoring quicker and more accurate. So I've got just some example data here for a few different scales to show you a few different ways you can deal with issues that may arise. There's a few different scales. We've got the audit, alcohol use disorders identification test, the TRI, which is the temptation restraint inventory, the BIS, which is the Barrett impulsivity scales, and the AAAQ, which is the alcohol approach and avoidance questionnaire. And these have slightly different ways of scoring them all, so I'm going to go through each one, show you how you'd score them, and hopefully when you come to do your own scoring of questionnaires, you can apply what you've learned here to doing your own questionnaires relatively easily. So doing these things in syntax is actually quite straightforward. So I'm going to go through each one at a time. The first one we're going to look at is the audit. Okay, this is a 10 item scale. So we've got audit 1 to audit 10. And basically all we need to do is have a sum of responses. So we just need to total all the items up. This is really straightforward to do in SPSS when you're using syntax. One thing I always recommend doing when you're doing this is make sure you get SPSS to write all the variable names for you. So to just illustrate that point, what I tend to do is I go to audit 1 to 10, click them across here, and then I click paste. So this has opened up a syntax file now in which it's got our variables listed here. We don't need any of this information, but now we know if we're going to take any of these audit things to write out, we know we've got them spelled right and so on, because if you make a typo at any point, it won't recognise things. So what we've got here is we just need to do total scores. There's a few ways to do it, but the first thing we've got to create our new variable, and this always begins with the compute command, and then you need to give it a new variable name, and we'll just call this one audit total. I put underscore in here because you can't actually have a space in the SPSS column title, so an underscore is just a way of making things clearly labelled. So all you need to do is the total scores. There's a few different ways you could actually go about this. The simplest process is just to do the sum command. So this is going to tell it just to add up everything following this command. Then you open your brackets. Now we need to put in here what variables we want. So we can put that in there like that. And then we type the execute command. If you don't do the execute command, it will compute everything, but it won't appear in your data set. And then what we need to do is just put in a comma after each of the variables, like so, just to separate them out. And then we click run, highlight it, click run, and then we can go to our data set, and if you scroll to the very end, you'll see it's now totaled those scores up for us. Because, however, audit 1 to audit 10 are right next to each other in the data set, because we've labelled our data sensibly, so we put audit scores 1 all the way along to 10 together, we can actually make this syntax even simpler. So instead of that, we could get rid of everything in the middle and just write 2 in the middle. Sum of audit 1 to audit 10, so it's going to sum up all of those, so it becomes actually an even simpler command, and it will produce, does the same thing, it just overwrites your data, but of course it's going to give you exactly the same scores as it did before. So that's the other method of doing it, so a basic sum command. So you see how quick and easy it is to do a total score on a questionnaire if you put things in order. So that's for the audit scores. However, things aren't always as straightforward as that. So let's look at the next example. So the next example we've got is the temptation restraint inventory. So you can see this has got 5 subscales to it, called govern, emotion, cognitive preoccupation, restrict and concerns about drinking. And each one of them is made up of 3 items. So if you want to create these subscale items, it's a relatively simple process that's quite similar to what we did for the audit. So as before, to make sure we've got all the variables right in front of us, we can just paste the variables from a command box into our syntax file. So as I say, this is just so, there you go, you can see you've got all your variables listed here, so you can just make sure you're typing them up, giving them the correct names. So what we need to do is again give the compute command, which will create our new variable and then tell SPSS what items make up this variable. So each case we write compute, and then we'll call this tri govern, and then equals, and then it is the sum of, and as we can see, the govern is items 9, 13 and 15. So we need item 9, item 13, and 15. So this is now, oops, put the gap there. So this now, and close brackets and do a full stop to enable to calculate things. So this now is going to compute the sum of these 3 items. We can't use the to command because between 9 and 13 there's items 10, 11 and 12, and item 14 is between there, so it'd give us an incorrect calculation. For this case we need to sum all those figures, and then we just need to repeat this process for each of those items. So now we've written up all the syntax, these 5 scales. So we've got govern, emotion, cognitive preoccupation, restrict and concerns about drinking. So we just need to highlight that and click run. And now if we look at our output, we have got all our new scales. Scores, subscale scores have appeared there. So this is computed all the subscales. So what you'll notice now though, this actually has a second order factors in this scale. So it's got this cognitive and emotional preoccupation score and cognitive behavioural control score. And these are made up of, the first one's made up of govern, emotion and cognitive preoccupation, and the second one's made up of restrict and concerns about drinking. So we can do that in a really quick and straightforward way. So as before, we can ask SPSS to give us our new variable names in this way, and click paste, and this will put them into our syntax file for us. So now what we can do, we can compute the second order factor. So like compute, and the first one is, we'll call it TRI-CEP for cognitive and emotional preoccupation, and that equals the sum of govern, emotion and cognitive preoccupation. So we can copy and paste, and cognitive preoccupation, full stop, otherwise it won't run, and execute. Then we can run that, and then it will compute our higher order factor, TRI-CEP. And of course you can do exactly the same thing, would just be written for cognitive behavioural control, like so. So we can just highlight that one, click run, then we've got our other variable there. So this is now showing you how to do some subscales and how to compute some higher order factors from those subscales as well. So what about things where we've got to have reverse scoring? So an example of that is the Barrett impulsivity scale. So the Barrett impulsivity scale in this data set is just labelled as BIS, and you can see all items are scored on a 1 to 4 scale, 3 subscales and reverse scorings, and some of those are marked with a star. So for example, item 5 is just normal scored, but item 9 has to be reversed before you add all these scores together. Likewise, 20, that's got to be reversed and the other ones haven't. For motor, only 1 needs reversing. For non-planning, you'll see actually most of these items need reversing. So we can't just simply sum the items, we've got to do something as part of the process first. This is actually relatively straightforward. To reverse an item, all you need to do is subtract that item score from 1 more than the highest possible score. So in this case we've got a 1 to 4 scale. So what we do is, to reverse an item, we subtract that item score from 5. So say for example somebody had a score of 1 and we need to reverse that score. So what we do there, we go 5 minus 1 equals 4. So this person, so 1 on a 1 to 4 scale is the lowest score, but we have to reverse that item, so we subtract it from 1, and that gives us a score of 4. So if it was a 1 to 7 scale, to reverse an item, you'd subtract the score that the individual gave for that item from 8. If it's a 5-point scale, you'd subtract the score from 6. So how can we do this in SPSS? Again, it just requires some thinking about what items you need to put where and how you need to reverse them. So again, as usual, we'll pop all the items that we need into our syntax file. So let's make some space. So let's just do the first one. So we need to do BIS attentional first, so we'll go compute command BIS attentional. Okay, that equals the sum of 5, reverse 9, 11, reverse 20, 28, 6, 24, 26. So what we need to do is put in these items, so let's through one at a time. So we've got BIS 5. Now the next one, item 9, needs to be reversed. So to reverse something, what we do, we open another set of brackets, we get that item, so we've got BIS 9, copy and paste that, and then we write 5 minus. So before it adds it up, because you put it in brackets, SPSS will minus that score from 5 and then it'll add it up, so that gives you your reverse for that item. And then we've got BIS 11, which is non-reversed, and you can just type them if you want. So BIS 20, and now BIS 20 needs reversing, so we do 5 minus, close brackets, then we've got BIS 28, BIS 6, BIS 24, BIS 26. Oh, and you make sure you don't put a full stop in by error, because otherwise it'll give you very odd results. And close brackets. So now it's going to add up item 5, reverse 9, 11, reverse 20, 28, 6, 24 and 26. And then execute command, click run, and again what this has done, it's computed our new variable here, our BIS attentional, giving us our sum scores. And again we would simply repeat this identical process for the remaining 2 items. So now we've got the 2 other subscales here as well. So we've got motor with just the 1 item, item 30 reversed, and the non-planning subscale with several of the items as labelled there, all reversed. So we just click highlight that and then click run, and now as you can see in our output, in our data set, sorry, we have all the subscales included there. So that's a brief run through of how to do sums and also how to reverse items. But some subscales operate a slightly different way. For example, the approach avoidance of alcohol questionnaire, this has 3 subscales. However, we need a mean response. So we're interested in the mean response in these subscales. We don't want to add them up, we need to get a mean. So this is, again, not a very complicated process once you know what you need to ask for. So what we can do for this one, again, just to make sure all variables that we use are spelled correctly and so on, is we can use, copy them, and then just click paste. So now we've got all these items. So what we need to do is, again, compute our subscales, giving them a clearly sensible name. So we'll go compute AAAQ, and we'll call the first one, again, inclined indulgence, so we call that ind. Now that equals the mean of items 1, 3, 5, 9 and 14. So for that we simply give it the mean command, open brackets, and then we need AAAQ 1, 3, 5, 9 and 14. Not forgetting to put a comma in between every single one. If you don't do that, it won't recognize the command properly. And of course, full stop at the end. And then we can say execute, so it automatically does that. So if we do this now, and we just click run, and we can look at our output, and there we've got our mean inclined indulgence scores, so we get some decimals in this because it's a mean score. And then we just simply would repeat the same process for the other variables. So now we've completed all them, the other 2, so asking for the means of those items, and then we click run. If we had to reverse one of these items, we could simply, as we've done before, add the brackets and subtract it from one above what the entire scale is measured from, and that would do a mean of that, but it would reverse that item if you needed to do that. So that's generally all you really need to know to do these things, but I will show you some little bits and bobs that may be useful for you if you come to have issues when you're doing this process. Firstly, the execute command. If you don't use the execute command, I'll show you what happens. So let's just delete that from our data set, and now if we get rid of the execute command and we run this, it runs. However, if you look at your data set, it's blank. It doesn't fill in any of the numbers. So it's done the title but not the numbers, and you'll see here it says transformations pending, and that basically means because you haven't told it to execute it, it's done it, but it won't put it in the data set. So you can either write execute in your syntax or rerun, or you go to transform and then just click this run pending transformations, and then that completes it for you. A few other issues that may happen. So when people go to run things, if you don't have a full stop at the end, you can see the execute command deactivates. We click run, and it gives us this error. The expression ends unexpectedly because it expects to see a full stop there. This also appears in the output execution of the command stop. Because it ends unexpectedly, it means it's getting no information, just ended. A full stop says this is the end of this program, you can run this portion of the script that's been written. What if you put in a variable by, let's change this variable. So you've got space in there by mistake. If you run this, it says incorrect variable name. Either variable name is more than 64 characters, which is the upper limit, or it is not defined by a previous command. So basically what's happened here is this doesn't exist in the data set. So SPSS wants to use a variable called AAA and another variable called Q1 to compute a mean score. However, those don't exist, so it can't pull in that number. You'll see in your output as well, it says specifically can't find AAA. So this basically, if you do get this error, you can just look at this and go, that's not a variable name, what have I done wrong? Yeah, look, this one's called AAA, so obviously incorrectly put a space in. Other issues that could happen is if you forget to do a comma between them maybe, so if you run that, the expression is incomplete, check for missing operands, invalid operators, or match parentheses, and so on. So this is a slightly different thing, the expression is incomplete, check for missing operands, and that's what you've essentially got. You've got the missing thing that's separating these out. So you just merely need to put a comma in there. So that's another common thing that people can get wrong. So just make sure that you remember to execute all the commands and check for typos. That's why I copy and paste things in, because if you're copy and pasting things, you're not going to get the commands wrong. It's easy to, and sometimes when you've written long versions of these things, it's really easy not to be able to spot your own little tiny mistake that you've made somewhere, and it can become quite a frustrating process. If you write one long one and then run it all in one go, it may be difficult identifying where you've made errors, so it's always a good idea to run these things stage by stage.